Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for October 1st, 2024, and I'm Jada Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. It is the year of our Lord, 2024, and we have a brand new film from the legendary Francis Ford Coppola. It is wild. I cannot believe it.
The Godfather himself.
Never thought we would see the day, but here we are. Yes, the Godfather himself out with a new film that, for better or worse, is pretty unforgettable. For reasons we'll talk about.
What was it, like 4 decades in the making? I think it was something like that.
Yeah, I think I read that he started developing it in 1983, actively developing it in 1983, but it wasn't until 1989 where an initial concept came together to be shot in Rome, an actual Rome. But because of Coppola's history with his studio and debts that he had incurred from some unfortunate flops that had incurred, he had to pay off a bunch of debt to Hollywood. Therefore, Megalopolis was never made, and he had to resort to making other films to make money, to pay off said debts. And therefore, Megalopolis has always been on the back burner. It's something he's never been able to do. And even in today's cinema landscape, no one was really willing to give him the money. I mean, famously,
it's a vanity project. Yeah.
Famously, he sold off his winery to fund this project, to get it off the ground. He's getting up there in age. He's what, 82, 83 at
I
this
think
point?
so. Yeah.
85, I think it says here. So it's now or never, right? I mean, we don't know how much longer we're going to get the man. Hopefully we get him for another 20 years, but you just never know.
You never know. And I do wonder, because he was firing on all cylinders in the 1970s, and then movies like Apocalypse Now and then One from the Heart especially really bankrupted him.
Yes.
And I do wonder how this movie specifically would have played if he were able to make it in, let's say, the early 90s, for instance.
Yeah.
I wonder how that would have changed things.
Yeah, it's a great question to ask. I mean, it is unfortunate, the Hollywood system, how it was evolving. It was a lot of bad timing and unfortunate luck on his end. Apocalypse Now, I know it ended up bankrupting him, or at least leading the way. But no one can argue with the results of that film, though.
I think that's
one of the best war films ever made.
I know The Godfather exists. I realize that, but I think Apocalypse Now is his best film. I really do.
I don't think you're alone in that. I think a lot of people would note that it is his best film. It's certainly up there. It's in the conversation. There's no doubt about it. You're right. His output in the 70s is ridiculous. It really is.
I would go to bat for One from the Heart. Like, have you seen that film?
Yeah, I have seen it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do really like it as well.
Yeah, it's not great by comparison to those 70s films, but like there's an ambition, there's a look to that movie that is absolutely stunning. Like that basically could be the greatest silent film ever made if people, didn't talk in it.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Yeah. No, it is unfortunate that those two films flopped the way they did, which again is the reason Megalopolis wasn't made in the 80s or the 90s or even the 2000s. He had to do a lot of other work to catch up, ultimately leading to him investing more time into his winery and building that business. And as time went on, he obviously started doing less and less films, which leads us to today, where he sells his winery, I'm going to make Megalopolis. I'm going to do it on my own dime. I'm going to lose a lot of money in the process. We joked about this on episode 604 this last week. A budget of 120 million. It is currently made $5.3 million at the box office.
Historic flop.
But we all knew that was going to happen. He knew that was going to happen, but still funny.
It's honestly kind of appropriate. The way that this film deals with history, the fact that the movie itself is going to be a historical focal point for just movies in general is kind of appropriate, even if it's not for the best reasons.
Exactly. So I am so eager to talk about this film. How familiar are you, or is it something you did research on as far as the Catalanarian conspiracy that this film uses as its crux? Is that something that was you learned in history class, for example?
A little bit. I think we may have called it different things, but not as much. If anything, I was really going into this movie knowing about its, let's say, its historical recreations of the Roman Empire, we'll simply say. And from that angle, I definitely knew a little bit more about that. But from what you're talking about, no, that's a little that I'm admittedly a little bit ignorant towards that.
Okay, no, that's very fair. I admittedly didn't know too much about it, or at least I didn't recall. I think I might have learned this really from my dad.
Okay.
In high school, because my dad is a massive historian. He's a big history nerd. And that has come through on this show in various forms over the years, how that's infiltrated me as well. I'm not quite the history nerd as he is, but I certainly have my eras that I really do indulge in. But I think my dad was the one that first introduced me to to Roman history and the Catalanarian conspiracy, which this film uses as its main crux for its drama and power struggle and everything.
Yeah,
the characters involved, the names of the characters in this film are the literal the literal people that were involved in that conspiracy. So, which is very brazen, of course. Like Coppola's not hiding that at all.
No, he's not hiding. Yeah. Cicero is a direct name there. I know that. That's about the extent of it. But yeah, I do know that he's really pulling it very literally.
Yeah, very much so. Anyway, I wanted to set the table there because I don't think you and I are going to get into the history as much, the Roman history and how that is utilized here. We are very much aware of it, but I'm not quite as nerdy with it as, let's say, World War II history.
You don't need to be in order to understand what Coppola's doing here.
No, absolutely. But I think about some of the reviews we've had recently, speaking of our 1940s era Best Picture winner series, and I was able to get real nerdy with a lot of the history utilized in the films.
The war history there specifically, that's really your bread and butter.
Yeah, I won't be able to, unfortunately, I won't be able to get quite as nerdy here, but I still find it fascinating that he's using real history to inform this film in a lot of ways. So, all right, let's dig into this. Megalopolis, written and directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Never thought I would be able to say those words here on the show when we're talking about a new film, but here we
finally
are.
Here.
It's finally here. It stars Adam Driver, Giancarlo Esposito, Nathalie Emmanuel, Aubrey Plaza, Shia LaBeouf, John Voight, Lawrence Fishburne, Catherine Hunter, Dustin Hoffman, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Megalopolis, the city of New Rome, the conflict between Caesar Catalina. Again, the names, it's all right there. The city of New Rome hosts the conflict between Caesar Catalina, a brilliant artist in favor of a utopian future, and the greedy mayor Franklin Cicero. Between them is Julia Cicero, her loyalty divided between her father and her beloved. All right, let's get into it, Brendan. Lay it on me. What do you think about Megalopolis? Yeah.
It's not even a word. That's all I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
This is so perfect that we're timing this with episode 604, talking about ambitious failures that we would also be willing to defend. Movies that maybe we actually kind of like, even despite their blemishes, that they trip over their ambitions a lot. I do think Megalopolis qualifies. I don't think it qualifies in the same ways. I think it actually is a really interesting connection to that by also being its own thing. It's
Mhm.
interesting because I don't think I enjoyed this movie all that much, yet at the same time, I wouldn't change a damn thing about it. Like,
Okay.
I think I love that it exists in this way. I brought up the question earlier, how different this movie would have been had Francis Ford Coppola been able to make it in the early 90s when he was able to finally conceive, I guess, some type of blueprint for it. I think it would have maybe been a better crafted movie, but there's something about the weighting of it all, the fact that it is such a late career vanity project for him, that adds a weird meta contextualization to it that just makes it all the more fascinating to me. It's a movie I love that it exists in this way, that it was made at a time when Hollywood is so known for, compromising the visions of their filmmakers, especially for IP related content. And
Mhm.
here's a filmmaker that says, screw that. I am making an uncompromised film in my way. I love that idea that I honestly don't even care if I like the final product or not. I like that the film exists in this way. There are things about it I loved. There are things about it I didn't love as far as how it functions as a I don't even want to say how it functions as a movie. This is not functioning as a movie. This is not really a
It is
movie.
a fable. It tells you that straight up.
I guess that's the thing. This movie is so unsubtle; it might as well be operating with a sledgehammer every step of the way.
Uh,
It's obvious what Coppola's intent with this movie is, topically, thematically, and if you've seen the movie in IMAX, many IMAX showings also had this Q&A up front where he even says what he wanted the movie to be about, and it is all over this movie. So
mhm.
he's not hiding those things, and if anything, if I wish this movie did anything differently, I do wish its internalized ambition was able to match its external ambitions, because visually it's a
Mm.
very ambitious film. I don't think it always matches what's going on underneath. I think he's going for interesting things. I just don't know if he conveys those things in the most ambitious ways, but he visualizes it in a very interesting way that I found odd, I found sometimes dull, and then also found extremely riveting, and some of the best sequences of the year, all sometimes within a span of like 30 seconds of each other. So it's a thing. It's a thing.
Uh-huh.
I'll simply say that.
It is definitely a thing that exists. I saw it in IMAX. It was me and three others. It does exist. That we can confirm. Look, I deeply admire this film. It
Sure.
is truly, genuinely one of the most disjointed films ever made. To say that it's messy is putting it mildly. It is
Mhm.
an utter train wreck. But there's something about Coppola's unbridled filmmaking that I absolutely loved. It is a fever dream hallucination that's simultaneously a reflective rumination on what makes our society vulnerable and on the verge of collapse, while
Mhm.
also being a warm, idealistic cipher for hope and change. Its futuristic aesthetic and imagery is often very engrossing. Its golden yellow palette is evocative, but often juxtaposed with grungy, darker hues as the film shifts between its nihilism and futuristic promise,
Mhm.
which I did kind of love. As chaotic as the
Okay.
editing
Okay.
is, I loved its teetering emotional spectrum. I think that's why the final shot of the film is honestly one of my favorites of the year, because it takes
Wow.
place at
Okay.
night where those darker hues are present, but there's a gold sheen to how the city is lit that is reflective
Mhm.
of that hope, all while these characters talk about the vitality of preserving a future for our kids. It's a fascinating concoction of its bleak and hopeful qualities that I found weirdly moving. As you're talking about, it is not at all subtle, but I love the convictions in Coppola's filmmaking and world building, which, speaking of, this is going to sound very strange, but you know what this film reminded me the most of? Batman Forever. Yep, you heard me right. Batman Forever is what I thought about when watching this film. Because
Oh my gosh, you are not wrong.
you think about
Oh
the
my
grimy
gosh, this is a
aesthetics
Joel
of-
Schumacher film all of a
It
sudden.
is a Joel Schumacher film. I'm telling you. The grimy aesthetics of the street are very similar. There's a whole trapeze element to the film. And Shia LaBeouf's performance is straight out of Batman Forever. You put LaBeouf next to Jim Carrey's Riddler, and he seamlessly slides right into that film. It is
Okay,
strange.
this
It's
movie
very weird.
rocks.
Yeah, but that's the kind of movie this is. It is wild how it shifts in tone, how it takes us from one scene to the next. There is not a whole lot that makes any sense, and that's its biggest strengths. When you're talking about how disjointed it is from its external to its internal, I wholeheartedly agree, and that's exactly what I found so engrossing about it.
I mean, Caesar Catalina here is kind of a superhero in some
Yeah,
ways.
he is. He
has
does have a
superpower.
superhero ability. I'm telling
Yeah.
you, he's the Batman of this movie, and LaBeouf is the Riddler of it. It has a similar grungy aesthetic as you see in the Schumacher films. There's a campiness to it, of course.
Which
I'm
is
telling
the
you,
thing I
like,
love. Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
you're right. The campiness of this movie is perhaps the thing that surprised me the most, and that's honestly the thing I like the most. I know some
Yeah.
people who haven't gone for this movie who do think it's genuinely terrible, and they're right to think that. It's not a good movie by the definition of what makes a quote unquote movie.
uh-huh.
But some of those individuals have cited Shia LaBeouf and Aubrey Plaza as some of the weakest elements here, when I think they might
Oh,
be the two
man.
strongest elements here.
I agree. I think they're really great. Again, maybe it's because, and in all transparency, and this will come as a shock given perhaps my opening statements,
Mhm.
I say facetiously, I love Batman Forever. Like, I'm a huge defender of that movie.
I think that movie gets better with time, given the landscape of
it's-
superhero movies now.
It's so good. I agree. It's so good. It's so weird. And I couldn't help but think about how this film, and obviously Coppola is not thinking of Batman Forever. I do think a lot of this is coincidence, but
Sure.
the grunginess, and that the kind of darker aesthetics of this film are kind of like really shot like right out of a Schumacher Batman movie.
It does kind of have a similar glossiness.
It do-
You're not
yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, and then you think of the campiness of LaBeouf and Plaza that is so akin to the performances, the villain performances, especially of that film. There's a whole trapeze element to this film as well. Where
yeah,
they
the whole-
remove the nets. Like, I'm telling you, like, it's all out of Batman Forever.
There's even simultaneously edited with this hallucinatory sequence. It's kind of similar to Bruce Wayne partaking in Edward Nygma's machine. as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, there's a whole exactly. Like,
Okay, this is
I'm
Batman
not
Forever.
saying that he was inspired by it, but maybe he was.
You're not, but you're also not saying it.
exactly. I'm not saying that either. Yeah.
Oh, if there
Yeah.
wasn't ever a more confusing double negative. But anyway, it's now that's all I'm thinking about. Now you're making me love this movie all of a sudden.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear
Like,
it.
for reasons that probably shouldn't even be deserved. But anyway, but anyway, like I did enjoy the campiness of it, and I don't know if that's something that Francis Ford Coppola was going for, because he's clearly very passionate about this story. He
Yeah, yeah.
obviously wants to tell a story about conflict and divisiveness in our current day and age, and how that's coming together for the sake of art and for the sake of togetherness and hope. Like that's clearly what he's tried to evoke here, and he's using Roman history specifically to emulate that once again. And while I am not too familiar with the Catalarian conspiracy, as we talked about, which apparently took place in 63 BC, as I'm looking up here. There are
Mhm.
direct riffs from that. What I do think he's doing is using the recreation of history to showcase the importance of us learning history so we aren't doomed to repeat its mistakes. So he's
Yeah.
kind of
Mhm.
showcasing the cyclical nature of history now
Mhm.
repeating itself if we don't learn from those mistakes.
Which he
Again,
essentially regurgitates with that opening voiceover that we hear there from Lawrence Fishburne. Like
well,
he
that's the thing. Yeah.
straight up opened this film with, "This is what this movie's about."
This movie has dialogue that tells you the themes of the movie
Yeah.
every step of the way. Like we talked about Caesar Catalina having this superpower, which is to stop time. There's an explanation, a thematic explanation in this movie, literally, as to why that is. And it's
Yeah.
because he's a quote unquote artist. It's because artists have the ability to freeze that moment in time for what they want to capture. So then here is Coppola now maybe making
Yeah.
some type of commentary on his own legacy. Like he's trying to maybe like insert himself into this movie in a way. And there might even be more readings outside of that. It's like
Yeah.
there are very literal definitions that maybe could have been more nuanced, and maybe selfishly I would have preferred a little bit more nuance, so that way I thought the ambitions there would have matched the visual ambitions on display. But I at least felt like there was a genuine conviction there, and sometimes that's all
Yeah.
that matters.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And you are right that he is using Roman history and its greed, political division, special interest, and how those things plagued Rome, ultimately leading to its downfall, which then this film uses as a cautionary tale for the present. I completely agree. I do think, and you're very much invoking what I think what Coppola wants to convey more than anything there when you're talking about Caesar and who he is in this film.
Yeah.
But I think what he really wants to convey, messiness and all, is that we are capable of good and great things if we let art and creativity lead our consciousness instead of those feeble desires for power and greed. It's not a revolutionary idea, but I do
Not
think
at
there
all,
is
yeah.
a palpable conviction to it. And I think that does come through in how he treats Caesar, especially. There is a sincerity to the character. I do love that he is this futurist haunted by the past. He's a dreamer who wants to revolutionize the future with this new technology and these idealistic concepts that will bring people together. But we also learn that he is grief stricken and tethered to personal tragedy. It's a great irony that is further heightened by a piece of context later on in the film where we see how that tragedy gives him a path forward as a dreamer. So it's a fascinating cycle that he's stuck in until Julia comes along and forces him to reconcile with his past, present, and future. And while in between all of that, it is full of high and low brow comedy, bursts of slapstick, some burlesque, and all kinds of filmmaking tactics
All kinds of
that make this
stuff.
film all kinds of stuff. But I think when you're able to parse through all of these cinematic toys that he throws at us, there is a sincerity to Caesar and that emotional irony that I do think gives this film a strength, or at least I was moved by the conviction. And ultimately, I think that's what this will come down to is how much do you respond to his conviction? Because you are right. As a movie, again, it is a train wreck. It is extremely, extremely disjointed. At times, it is really hard to parse through what is happening from moment to moment, or at least why he arrives at this moment in terms of the editing. It is extremely stilted. But again, I think when you're able to parse through all of that and you look at Caesar and who he is and the evolution of the character from who he is at the beginning, that opening frame there on top of the building to that last shot of the film, the close up there on the child, there is a warmth. There's a surprising warmth to this film underneath all of its bleakness that I couldn't
I
help but respond to.
I think the ending is still somewhat open to interpretation, whether there is maybe a bit of a cynical side to it. And I think a lot of it comes down to Caesar's vision for Megalopolis itself, this utopia he wants to create, because the visual depiction of Megalopolis is it it's very reminiscent of kind of like a heavenly utopia in a way. It definitely carries a similar aura that you might expect a heavenly visual to look like, which almost seems to suggest that this idea of togetherness and hope that Coppola wants to convey, maybe it's now only possible outside the universal. Maybe it's no longer in the realm of possibility anymore. Maybe we've broken too far. So like there is this aura of hope, but perhaps it's kind of a lost hope in a way that only these things can come in death. I kind of wonder if there's a. I mean, clearly this is a movie where everything he's doing has a purpose, and I'm trying to analyze each individual purpose, and I'm thinking, why does Megalopolis itself look like no one can even live there? How do people actually survive in this world? It almost seems impossible, and maybe that is the purpose to it. So it does add some layers that could potentially be there, which it's a fascinating idea. It's fascinating the way he tries to go about this.
I agree. And again, going back to my opening thoughts, I think that's what I love so much about the color palette, because it is very much operating within that dichotomy we've been talking about, as far as it being this rumination on our society being vulnerable and invoking ideas that are eerily similar to the collapse of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, it's also this warm cipher for hope and change, given what Caesar represents and what he wants to build.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think the aesthetics very much tap into that. Again, when we're talking about the Batman Forever comparisons here, the grungy aesthetics of this film, those are employed when the film is at its most nihilistic, when it's at its most bleak. But when it's aiming for those more hopeful tones, that's where he uses those golden yellow hues. And I do find that evocative. And you are right. I think that's what's so brilliant again about that final exchange there at the end, is that it very much is a concoction of both. It takes place at night. It still has that grungy, slimy feel to it because the city hasn't completely evolved into Megalopolis yet. But there is hope. There is a promise. So like there's this gold sheen throughout a lot of the lighting of the city that gives us this vibrancy that taps into, again, the conversations they're having there and this hope that we might now have. But we don't really know. We don't know. For all we know, society could.
For all we know,
tomorrow.
this is impossible. This ain't going to happen.
It is impossible. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. But I think
so
if anything,
I do think he's trying to thread that needle. Absolutely.
But I think if anything, he is suggesting that this conflict that existed between Catalina and Cicero is ultimately the biggest problem. And that conflict is ultimately what led room for this anarchy to form, led by Claudio, played by Shia LaBeouf. Like, that's why that ends up happening, because of this feuding divisiveness that is so publicized. It allows room for someone else to come in and basically antagonize both. Like, that's the danger of that.
Exactly.
And admittedly, I think most of that works primarily because I did like the banter between Adam Driver and Giancarlo Esposito. I did. I thought they were pretty good in their respective performances. I liked the Caesar dynamic. I liked the Cicero dynamic there as well. And we mentioned Shia LaBeouf being in a completely different world all on his own. I was mesmerized every time he was on screen. Absolutely was.
No, I completely agree. And again, maybe it's because I deeply love the performances of Batman Forever. And when I saw that LaBeouf was trying to outdo Jim Carrey, I was like, yes, I'm on board. Let's do this. Let's see where this goes.
That whole stretch at the Coliseum, or what the recreation of the Coliseum, it's kind of like a 30-minute short film.
Yeah, it
interjected
is.
in the middle of this. That
Yeah.
whole stretch, I think, is the best part of the movie. Like that whole
It's great.
stretch is like from a filmmaking standpoint,
Yeah.
it really is good, I think.
Well, and yeah, I completely agree. And I think why that is important, or at least why I think it's effective here ultimately, is
Mhm.
because the drama here is rudimentary in the
Yeah.
sense that it's not trying to do anything outlandish. It is invoking the struggles that led to the Roman collapse. Well, what is that? It's greed, it's power, it's vying for power and
Mhm.
conspiracy, and how that ultimately leads to the inner conflict that led to, like, it's a
Yeah.
tale as old as time. There's nothing
Absolutely.
interesting
Yeah.
there.
That's why
So
it's a
how do
quote
we
unquote
make that
fable.
interesting? Well, we make these performances extremely campy. We make the film a hallucinatory fever dream with the editing and
Yeah.
the the crazy, like the Virgin hanging in the chair, and then this video comes on that gives us certain context that brings in some drama and conflict there. Like
Mhm.
it's just a wild sequence. And you're right, it's a 30-minute short film kind of condensed into the middle of this film,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely hypnotizing. It's incredible, and I think that's where I just had a lot of fun with this movie. The drama, the conflict is not revolutionary, and it's not supposed to be.
It's not, but
Like,
there are
Coppola
times.
is very aware that
Yeah.
the conflict here is tired. However, it's the same things though. Like, he can't
Well-
move away from it because those are the same things that potentially could be the downfall of
Well,
our society today.
That's the
So
repetition of history, so it
that's
has to be
so it
rudimentary.
has
Like,
to be here. But
yeah.
cinematically, how can we make it fun? Well, we're going to be uncouth. We're going to be campy. We're going to have high and lowbrow comedy. It's going to be slapsticky. It's going to be experimental. It's going to be expressionistic. It's going to be adventurous in its filmmaking. And I love that. So it plays out like an epic
Well-
Roman tragedy that involves drama, it involves violence, there's romance, there's affairs, there's hidden
Yeah.
agendas, there's revolts, there's death, there's carnage. It has all of that.
Well, and that's why you have Aubrey Plaza and Shia LaBeouf in this movie in the first place. That's why you
Yeah.
have John Voight doing whatever John Voight is doing here.
Whatever he's doing, yeah.
That's why you have Katherine Hunter, who is one of the most interesting actresses working today. And that's also why you have Jason Schwartzman in the background just being
Yeah.
Jason Schwartzman.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Talia Shire giving a monologue that might be one of the best monologues of the year.
Yeah.
Whether or not the drama is rudimentary, I don't care about that as long as I find it compelling. If I really did have one bone to pick with this movie, and it has nothing, it kind of has something to do with the film functioning as a quote unquote film, but I don't care about the messy narrative. I don't care about the rudimentary drama like we're talking about. It
Mhm.
just needs to compel me. I do think Nathalia Emmanuel is terrible in this. I think she is I genuinely think it is so out of place. It is
man.
it's a nothing performance. It's a nothing
Yeah.
performance, and I think it's so tragically out of place given the amount of character Coppola's imbuing the rest of this movie with. It really feels like an actor acting in a green screen environment with no one around and doesn't know what to do. Like, that's what the performance feels like to me. And I found that really unfortunate given the fact that for the first third she's kind of the main character. And
Yeah.
it just, like, that did not work for me, sadly.
No, I agree. And it's nothing against Nathalie Emmanuel as a performer. I think she's been good in other things.
I think she's charming.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
as a person and as an actor in general, I'm with you.
Yeah, like, did you see The Killer, John Woo's The Killer remake?
No, I didn't, but I've heard fun things about that.
Yeah, like, she's really good in that. Like, I thought she was fantastic in that film.
I like her in the Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah, I like her in those
Yeah.
movies as well. So, like, she's certainly an actress that I do like.
Yeah.
I do think she is the weakest link here, and I think it is because she plays her role so straight.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what Coppola was asking for here. I don't really know. But she was the one performance that didn't seem to understand the kind of movie that she was in.
I'm with you.
And
with you.
And again, I don't know if that's her. I don't know if that's Coppola, but the result is much more mundane.
Mhm.
Whereas everyone else here, in one way or another, is out of their mind. And I love that about the
I
film.
know, I love that. And the thing is, maybe you need at least one performance that isn't quote unquote out of their mind, as you say.
Yeah.
But I also don't think it's in the right movie's mind. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't find a
Exact. Yeah.
different type of balance that still fits. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's unfortunate there. And I say that, kind of saddeningly because I do like her as a performer. As we said, I think she's
Yeah.
very charming. This is not her best work, and I don't know if it's her fault or, as you said, if it was what Coppola was asking of her
Yeah.
that
I
may
don't
not
know.
have been the
It's
right
hard to
thing.
tell.
Yeah.
But I do agree that's where the film does ultimately fizzle for me a little bit. And it's unfortunate because the kissing scene between Julia and Caesar is one of the more significant moments of the film, especially from a visual perspective, because
I agree.
Caesar finds himself again. It's that idea I mentioned earlier of him being haunted by his past, despite him
Yeah.
being this futurist who wants to revolutionize the future.
Mhm.
And he finds himself stuck because of how he's tethered to his personal tragedy. And she comes along and forces him to reconcile with that duality. And
Mhm.
it leads to them having this moment of intimacy that I do like on paper as far as what Coppola's vision is and what he's aiming for there, especially given
Mhm.
the time element that you brought up earlier, how that
Yeah.
comes into play. And it creates this gravitational field when they do embrace finally. And it's a great visual. It's a
Yeah,
stunning,
it is.
stunning visual that I do really love. I don't think it carries as much weight as it could have, though, because
Oh, I
her
agree.
performance just doesn't make the character as full and rich as it could have been, I guess.
You
I
know,
don't know. I don't know if that's the right way to articulate it, but there was something missing for me with the character. I agree.
in the beginning of the film, like I said, the first third, the character of Julia is sort of the main character. She's sort of the middle ground that starts not pulling the strings, but sort of straddles both lines that leads to the dynamic
Yeah.
that becomes the crux of the movie in
She
many
gets
ways.
caught between Cicero and
Yeah.
Catalina, as the
Yeah.
synopsis states. Yes.
But when she's introduced, she spends a lot of time with the character of Claudia, played by Chloe Finneman, who also just happens to be Shia LaBeouf's character's sister, even though they're also
Yeah.
weirdly romantically involved. So that's very much, I guess, Roman Empire stuff there.
Yeah,
So,
that's yeah.
but I guess that's an example to say, like, I would have loved to have seen Chloe Finneman maybe in a role like Julia instead. If there was a bit of a
Mhm.
swap or something, it doesn't have to be Chloe Finneman specifically, but maybe someone with that type of energy that can at least,
Yeah.
bring some personality to it. Because for a movie like this, for it to have little personality in pockets, that's really its biggest sin, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And I mentioned in my opening that there are many moments here in the movie that I did find fascinatingly dull, and I realize it's mostly when it's funneled through Julia, and it's really because of Emmanuel's
Yeah.
performance.
I agree. And maybe that's a great transition to Adam Driver because he's simply one of the best working today. He's one of
So go-
the best of his
So go
generation.
back to the club.
He's phenomenal. And he's just as campy as a lot of these other performers at times. And that's certainly one of the best examples that people are talking about on social media for sure. But there are other moments. He's such a big part of that whole theatrical 30-minute short film we
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, where he
Yeah.
has this hallucinatory fever dream. And it's a really fun sequence that he's obviously a big part of. And he's often funny at times in this film as well. And like, even like, I think of like one of the first times we really see him start to show his personality, because there are like, he opens the film and then there's the sequence with the building, the destruction of the building. But where
Yeah.
he really starts to show his sequence, where he really starts to talk for the first time, is when he shows up at that town hall meeting and starts doing the to be or not to be speech. And
Yeah.
we're going for it. Like, it's really playful and fun. And I do really like that. But to circling it back to Emmanuel, there are moments here because Driver has to drive, if you will.
Nice work. Yeah, yeah. I was waiting for that pun.
I had to.
Mr.
Sorry, it
Mr.
was
Dad
right
joke
there.
over
It was
here.
right
You have
there.
to live
I'm
up to your
sorry,
title,
I
man.
apologize. But he has to carry the emotional weight of this film. And there are times where he is asked to be straight, but it's Adam Driver. And he's able to convey a sincere, tender emotion that really the film doesn't earn otherwise, because the film is so disjointed, as we talked about. But Adam Driver is such a talented performer that when the film does arrive at those moments, he is able to give it credence because he's just that good. Where Emmanuel, it just isn't able to reach those same heights. So when it's about that character especially, it does falter. The only time I feel like she's able to transcend it, and I hate to be this superficial about it, so I in a lot of ways I do apologize, I guess, but
Okay.
the moments at the end of the film where I don't know if we can give away spoilers. Maybe we can. I don't know.
It's a
if
hard
you're
movie to
listening
spoil.
this, it is. I'll just say, like, there's a moment where she gets pregnant, and when she is holding the baby, there are some forceful moments there with the character and her convictions and how she feels about the future and her idealistic hope for the future, which changes because she now has a child. I think those moments work, but I do wonder if the images there are moving not because of her performance individually, but because of the visual of her holding a child.
I
and
think there's
talking about hope and change.
I think there's a complementary angle there that maybe amplifies the performance. It's also one of the few times that she gets a little bit more cathartic, and I think it's a character that maybe needed to emphasize a little bit more catharsis to actually give
That's
her a
true,
little bit
too.
more
Yeah.
personality. I think those moments she's able to at least make that believable, but I think it's also when she's balancing things off of Giancarlo Esposito, who's playing her father. And I think he does a great
He's
job in
also
those
really
sequences
great.
as well.
Yeah.
So I think she's certainly feeding off of his energy, and maybe that's the other complementary factor here.
And that's a great point, because Esposito is another one of those great actors where he's one of the less campy performers here as well, but he just has that ability to get to that next level. So he is able to give credence to that character and some of the hesitation that he feels. I think that's why, honestly, also one of my favorite images of the film is near the end when his wife is on that little
that conveyor belt of
that
sorts.
conveyor belt thing, and she's like, join me, and he's reaching out, like, he's so hesitant, and that hesitation I do think is felt because of his performance, what he brings to the character as far as the conflict that he has with Caesar throughout the film, and he just can't fully buy into it, but he knows that. But like, he loves his wife. He's just kind of struggling with that headspace.
That confliction is definitely felt.
It's definitely felt. And then he finally kind of reaches out to her there at the end. Like, I love that moment, because again, that's the film through that character wrestling with this idea of dolefulness and optimism. And it just comes through well in that character. But again, I think it's because he's just really great.
I think he's just really good. Yeah. He plays it straight for the most part by comparison to whatever anyone else is doing here. But I think that's the right one that needed to, maybe not necessarily Julia. The dryness of that character and that performance, I don't think sits well here, and that's really unfortunate. I think that really could have benefited the movie if that was stronger in a different way.
I agree. On the other end of that spectrum, we talked about LaBeouf earlier, and he is wild in this film. He is hilarious. He's goofy.
I like him in
this.
I like him in
as
this.
Well.
Yeah.
And equally, I think Aubrey Plaza is stunning here as well.
I like her
I think
in
she
this.
does such a great job of, again, bringing a campiness, kind of bringing this vile spirit to her character, which the character's name, Wild Platinum, an incredible name, but maybe what's even more incredible is how she came up with that name, like the joke around that. I thought was really great. Like I thought that was some fun commentary. So like I love that, and Aunt Plaza she's having the time of her life. She is having a ball.
She
with
loves
her
it.
performance here.
She loves being on screen for a Francis Ford Coppola film.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
It's really good. Like I just love how abrasive she is. I love how just how she's able to tap into the character's maniacal maneuverings and mechanics, and it's just really fun. There's a lot of fun. Again, that's a character that you could see in a Batman Forever kind of movie. Like she would slide, like her and LaBeouf would just slide right into Batman Forever, and no one
They
would
would
notice.
fit.
Like, no
They
one-
would fit. They would
perfectly.
absolutely fit. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, she's great. John Voight, I agree with you. Like his little role here, like like that moment at the end. I love that when he's in the bed and he's kind of talking to himself and everything seems fine, but the moment that door opens, you see him just kind of that slight tick on his face to go back to the performance that he's giving. It's so funny.
Yeah. It's like he got caught with his pants down or something.
Just love that.
Yeah.
And just the way that whole scene plays out, again, going back to the slapstickiness of it, the comedy, the campiness of it. I mean, I don't know if we should get into it, but like, it's just really funny how that whole thing plays out. It's hysterical.
There are even other actors there. I didn't even know Dustin Hoffman was in this movie until I was in the theater.
Until he shows up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just kind of love how, again, just this speaks to the messiness of the movie, but like that character at a certain point, his arc ends and it's kind of like a throwaway gag. Like it's just like a slight laugh.
It's like a
like, that's it.
Yeah. Best worst movie of the year? Or worst best movie of the year?
Yeah, like I don't know how you describe it. Like it's not a movie I can recommend to anybody.
How are you going to rate this on Letterboxd? Like
I truly don't know. Like I think I'm gonna end up giving it like a 3 out of 5, something like that.
Yeah, I was straddling between a 2.5 to a 3. But I mean, like star ratings for movies like this are kind of meaningless. Like I'm almost tempted to just give it words and not give it any rating whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't
know.
For me, all this comes down to his conviction, and it's the duality of fighting for hope and change in a world that's bleak and power hungry and greedy. And then there's the element that we talked about earlier as far as Coppola wanting to convey, the importance of letting art and creativity lead our consciousness. I think that's really what he wants to articulate here more than anything else. And then you compound that with how this is in a lot of ways a simple love letter to cinema about its past, its present, its future. He employs a lot of formal classical tactics here, like filmmaking tactics that invokes classic cinema, but it's also using a lot of present digital photography and CGI and cinematography. And it's also creating this futuristic setting. So like it's toying with cinema in a way that plays with all three of those phases. And it's often brash, again, brazen, it's messy, but there's something about it, the conviction of it, that I found really beautiful simultaneously.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And I don't know, there's something about that alone. Like I would give it 3 stars for that, I guess is what
I think that's fair. And I love that it exists in this way. If I would have actually ended up loving the movie because it was a really good movie, I feel like that kind of deflates the intent of it. Like I kind of love that it exists as it does.
Yeah, I do as well. Like it is, it's one of those movies where I think it thrives because it is this train wreck of a movie, but in that train wreck, there's a romp to be had with sincerity underneath.
Well,
like there's
knowing that Coppola himself is probably happy with the final product.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I think he loved it. Like, it is the movie he wanted to make. It was his money, and this is the final product that he wanted to put out there.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's why I'm just willing to embrace its provocative messiness.
Ambitious failure indeed.
Yeah. Yeah. Ambitious and maybe a failure on purpose. Like, I don't know, but
Makes it a different type of failure. Is it even a failure if it's a failure on purpose? Like, that is
I don't know.
there's a tricky question for you.
Well, look, he states up front that this is meant to be a fable. So, like, I don't think he cares about logic. He certainly doesn't care about plotting.
Oh,
he
no,
doesn't
of course
care
not.
about conventional character motivations and what leads you from A to B to C to D. None of that is here. All of that is thrown out of the window for the film to be this hallucinatory fever dream, to be an ode to cinema, to experiment, to be expressionistic, to be this love letter, and to find hope underneath the nihilism. And that is messy. Like, that's a messy process. That idea in and of itself is messy.
For sure.
So maybe that's where he wanted to, again, perhaps intentionally, make the film
Messy.
this train wreck, to make it messy, to kind of reflect how that is in real life.
The movie's
So-
bad, and it's purposely bad. So does that make it good? Gosh,
Maybe.
this is like, oh,
So, like, that's why I kind of love the movie. Like, I deeply admire it, while recognizing that as a conventional movie, as a formal experience, it is awful. It really is.
I mean, I don't think I have an interest in watching it again anytime soon. I don't think I'll need to in preparation for any awards we might make it eligible for. And I'm not even sure if I'll make it eligible for anything at the end of the year.
I
but-
could probably find a spot for it.
I mean, I can make up a category for it.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, I think
maybe, like,
if anything,
surprise
for like
performance or something
individual
like
or,
that.
or surprise movie, maybe. I don't know. I could see myself finding room for it, because it's something that, like, unlike you, I feel like I could go back and watch this tomorrow, or when it comes out on Blu-ray. Like, I'll immediately buy it and gladly watch it again.
Okay.
Because of the romp of it all. And again, I love Batman Forever, so take that for what it's worth, I guess. But I it's the same feeling I get when watching Batman Forever. I'm not
at
going
a
to sit here and try to tell you that Batman Forever is this great movie. It rivals The
I mean,
Dark Knight. No.
I'm
Batman
starting
Forever
to-
is great because it is a romp, because it's campy, because it's over the top, because it's not trying to be a conventional movie.
Yeah, I'm starting to love Batman and Robin.
That's another thing. Now, that's one I need to revisit. Like, I just haven't seen that one as much, but I could see myself
Sure.
coming around in a similar way,
Yeah.
you know, because that's also campy and weird and, you know, doing its own thing.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know. Like, I love the sincerity. I love the conviction of this film. And I love how reflective it is in terms of the real life messiness that we're experiencing. So, anyway, those are my thoughts. Megalopolis. I can't recommend it, though. Cannot recommend this to a single soul. So,
Especially
you know.
asking them to pay whatever money it costs to see it in IMAX.
yeah. No, that's true. I mean, the only thing is, if you listen to this conversation and you haven't seen it, but you find the conversation interesting, and maybe you're inspired to go see it, then yeah, go see it.
Yeah,
I
like
think there'll be
it'll
plenty to
provoke a
talk about
conversation
it.
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, with all of that said, if you agree or
Wow.
disagree with anything we had to say, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right, we have a review for The Wild Robot up. Go check that out. That was one of my favorite conversations of the whole year. So please go and listen to that review. Episode 604. We talk about ambitious failure movies inspired by Megalopolis. So
Yeah.
you can go hear us talk more about that and other stuff. There'll be a new Chasing the Gold, the new Women in Session out this week as well. And then we are transitioning to, what are we transitioning to this weekend?
We have Joker, Folie à Deux.
Joker. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We're getting into more
got
Joker.
a couple things.
So
The Outrun, we have that with Saoirse Ronan. That I know is getting some pretty wide distribution as well. I'm getting Saturday Night this weekend, the new Jason Reitman film. I don't think it's going wide, but I know I'm getting it. So maybe we can get to that one early. I'm not really sure yet.
Yeah. I know there's a screen or a local press screening for it. It depends if I'll have time to get to it or not. Because, I'm a busy dad, and Sam's neck deep in flag football, and those nights tend to cross over a lot these days.
Yeah,
so it's
that's
hard
fair.
for me to get to screenings. So
Yeah, makes sense.
we'll see. But yeah, we'll definitely get to, the Outrun. I know I can definitely see. Joker we'll definitely see. So this weekend should be fun. All right. Well, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. We hope you enjoyed our mega conversation on Megalopolis. Francis Ford Coppola, the man is back.
Yeah.
He did not disappoint as far as I'm
Megalog.
concerned. So, with all of that said, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the In-Session Film Podcast. Oh, Francis Ford Coppola never changed. Never changed, my man.
We're supposed to direct another movie.